Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Storytime with Uncle Monkey. I am your Uncle Monkey, and today's story is Hansel and Gretel. Just outside a large forest there lived a poor woodchopper with his second wife and his two children. The boy was named Hansel and the girl Gretel. They didn't have much to put between their teeth, and once, when prices rose sharply in the land, they couldn't even procure their daily bread. Now, as the woodcutter was worrying in bed one night about what he was going to do, tossing and turning in his anxiety, he sighed and said to his wife,
"What's to become of us? How can we feed our poor children when we have nothing for ourselves anymore?"
"Do you know what, husband?" his wife replied. "Tomorrow very early we'll take the children out to the forest where it's at its densest, and we'll make a fire for them, we'll give them each one more piece of bread, and then we'll go to our work and leave them alone. They won't find their way back home again, and we'll be rid of them."
"No, wife," said the man, "I won't do it. How could I have the heart to abandon my children in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them apart."
"Oh, you fool," she said. "Then all four of us will have to die of hunger. Go right ahead and plane the boards for our coffins." And she gave him no peace until he agreed.
"But I feel sorry for our poor children all the same," the man said.
Because they were hungry, the two children hadn't been able to fall asleep either, and when they heard what their stepmother had said to their father, they gave a shake of fright. Gretel shed bitter tears and said to Hansel, "Now we're done for." "Quiet, quiet," said Hansel. "Don't grieve. I'll find a way." And when their parents had fallen asleep, he got up, put on his little jacket, opened the lower half of the door, and sneaked out. The moon was shining very brightly, and the white pebbles lying in front of the house were shining like coins. Hansel stooped down and put as many in his jacket pocket as he could get in. Then he went back inside and said to Gretel, "Cheer up, dear little sister, and sleep peacefully. God won't desert us." And he went back to his bed. When day broke, even before the sun rose, the woman was already waking up the two children. "Get up, lazy bones! We have to go to the forest and fetch wood." And she gave each of them a piece of bread and said, "Here's something for lunch, but don't eat it in advance, because that's all you're getting today." Gretel tucked the bread into her apron because Hansel had pebbles in his pocket. Then all of them together set out into the forest. After they had walked a while, Hansel halted and gazed back at the house. He did so time and again. His father finally noticed and said,
"Hansel, why are you gazing and hanging back? Pay attention and remember we have legs."
"Oh, father," Hansel said, "I'm looking at my white kitten, who's sitting up on the roof saying goodbye to me." "Fool, that's not your kitten. It's this morning's sun shining on the chimney." But Hansel hadn't been looking at the kitten or the chimney. Rather, each time he had taken one of the bright pebbles out of his pocket and thrown it into the path. When they reached the middle of the forest, Father said,
"Now go gather wood, children. I'll make a fire so you aren't cold."
Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood, making a small mountain of it. The brushwood was kindled, and when the flame was nice and high, the father said,
"Now lie down by the fire and rest, children. We're going into the forest to cut trees. When we're done, we'll come back and pick you up."
Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each one ate his piece of bread. After sitting there so long, their eyes closed with drowsiness, and they fell fast asleep. When they finally awoke, it was already pitch dark. Gretel started to cry, saying, "How can we get out of the forest now?" But Hansel comforted her. "Just wait a while until the moon rises, then we'll find our way back." And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles, which were gleaming like freshly minted coins, showing them the way. They walked all night long and arrived back at their father's house when day was breaking. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You wicked children, why did you sleep so long in the woods? We thought you were never coming home." But their father was happy because he had felt bad about abandoning them that way. Not long afterward, there was a shortage of food everywhere. And the children heard their mother saying to their father in bed at night, "Everything has been eaten up again. All we have left is half a loaf of bread. After that, we've had it. The children must go. We'll take them deeper into the woods this time so they can't find their way out again. Otherwise, there's no way to save ourselves." The man was sad at heart, and he said to himself,
"It would be better if you shared your last morsel with your children."
but his wife wouldn't listen to anything he said. She scolded him and reproached him. Finally, he yielded a second time, and they agreed to do it the next day. But the children had still been awake and overheard the conversation. When their parents were asleep, Hansel once more got up, intending to go out and gather pebbles as he had done that earlier time. But the woman had locked the door, and Hansel couldn't get out. But he comforted his little sister, saying, "Don't cry, Gretel, and sleep peacefully. God will surely help us." Early in the morning, the woman came and rousted the children out of bed. They received their pieces of bread, but they were even smaller than last time. On the way to the forest, Hansel crumbled his bread in his pocket and halted many times and threw a crumb on the ground.
"Hansel, why do you keep stopping and looking around?" his father said. "Keep moving."
"I'm looking at my little dove who's sitting on the roof saying goodbye to me," Hansel replied. "Fool!" So the woman said, "That's not your dove. It's the morning sun shining on the chimney top." But little by little, Hansel threw all the crumbs onto the path. The woman led the children even deeper into the woods, where they had never been in their entire lives. Then once more a big fire was made, and their stepmother said, "Just keep sitting here, children, and if you're tired, you can sleep a little. We're going into the forest to cut trees. In the evening, when we're done, we'll come back and pick you up." When it was noon, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had scattered the crumbs of his piece on the path. Then they fell asleep, and the evening passed, but no one came for the poor children. They didn't wake up until it was pitch dark. Hansel comforted his little sister, saying, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises. Then we'll see the breadcrumbs that I scattered, and it'll show us the way home." When the moon rose, they set out, but they didn't find a single breadcrumb, because many thousands of birds that fly about the forest and the field had eaten them up. Hansel said to Gretel, "We'll find the way anyhow." But they didn't. They walked all night long, and one more day from morning to evening lost in the woods. But they couldn't get out of the woods, and they were extremely hungry. It was the third morning since they had left their father's house. They began walking again, but they got deeper and deeper into the woods, and if no help arrived soon, they'd surely perish. When it was noon, they saw a little house and the bird perched on its roof. When they were quite close to it, they saw the house was made of bread and roofed with cake, and its windows were gleaming sugar. "Let's have a go at it," said Hansel. "I'll have a hearty meal. I'll eat a piece of the roof. Gretel, you can have some of the windows. It'll taste sweet." Hansel reached up and broke off a little piece of the roof to see how it tasted, and Gretel stood next to the window panes and nibbled at them. Then a piping voice called from inside, "Nibble, nibble, mousie, who's nibbling at my housie?" The children replied, "The wind so wild, the heavenly child," and went on eating without being distracted. Hansel, who found the roof delicious, pulled off a big piece of it, and Gretel pushed out an entire circular window pane, sat down, and enjoyed it. Then the door suddenly opened, and an old woman, leaning on a crutch, came slinking out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they dropped whatever they were holding. But the old woman shook her head and said, "Oh, you dear children, who brought you here? Please come in and stay with me. No harm will come to you." She took both of them by the hand and led them into her little house. There she served them good food, milk and pancakes with sugar, apples, and nuts. Afterwards, white bedclothes were placed on two pretty little beds, and Hansel and Gretel lay down on them, thinking they were in heaven. But the old woman had only pretended to be so friendly. In reality, she was an evil witch who lay in wait for children. She had built the little bread house merely to lure them in. Whenever one fell into her hands, she'd kill it, cook it, and eat it, and that was a holiday for her. Witches have red eyes and can't see very far, but they have a keen sense of smell, like animals, and are aware of the arrival of human beings. When Hansel and Gretel approached her house, she had laughed maliciously and said mockingly to herself, I've got them! They won't get away from me! Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up. When she saw the two of them sleeping so charmingly with their round red cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a tasty morsel." Then she seized Hansel with her withered hand and carried him to a small pen where she locked him behind a barred door. No matter how loud he yelled, it did him no good. Then she went over to Gretel, shook her awake, and shouted, "Get up, lazy bones! Carry in water and cook something good for your brother, who's out in the pen and needs to be fattened up. When he's fat, I'm going to eat him." Gretel began to shed bitter tears, but it was all in vain. She had to do what the evil witch wanted. Now the finest food was cooking for poor Hansel, but Gretel got only crayfish shells. Every morning the old woman skulked out to the little pen and called, "Hansel, stick out your fingers so I can feel whether you're fat enough." But Hansel would stick out a little bone, and the old woman, who had weak eyes, couldn't see it and thought it was Hansel's fingers. She was amazed that he just wasn't getting fat. When 4 weeks had gone by and Hansel was still skinny, she was overcome with impatience and refused to wait any longer. "Hey, Gretel!" she shouted to the girl. "Look alive there and carry in the water. Whether Hansel is fat or thin, tomorrow I'm going to slaughter him and cook him." Oh, how sorrowful his poor sister felt when she had to go fetch the water, and how the tears flowed down her cheeks. "Dear God, please help us," she exclaimed. "If only wild animals had eaten us in the forest, at least we would have died together." "Save your whimpering," the old woman said. "None of it will do you any good." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out, hang up the kettle full of water, and light the fire. "First we'll bake," said the old woman. "I've already heated the oven and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which flames were already shooting. "Creep in," the witch said, "and see if it's properly heated, so we can put the bread in and cook it correctly." Once Gretel was inside, she was going to shut the oven door so Gretel would be baked in there. Then she intended to eat her up too. But Gretel realized what she had in mind and said, "I don't know how to do it. How do I get in the oven?" "Silly goose," the old woman said. "The opening is big enough. Just look, I could get in there myself." And she hobbled over and put her head in the oven. Then Gretel gave her a push so that she fell all the way in. And then she shut the iron door and shot the bolt closed. Ooh, she started to howl hideously, but Gretel ran away, and the wicked witch was cooked in the oven and burned in her misery. Gretel ran straight to Hansel, opened his little pen, and called, "Hansel, we're saved! The old witch is dead!" Then Hansel jumped out like a bird from its cage when the door opened. How they rejoiced, hugged each other, capered around, and kissed each other. And because they had no more reason to be afraid, they went into the witch's house, where there were chests full of pearls and jewels in every corner. "These are better than pebbles," said Hansel, and he stuffed his pockets with as many as would go in. And Gretel said, "I want to take something home with me too," and she filled her apron with them. "But we should leave now," said Hansel, "so we can get out of the witch's forest." But after they had walked a few hours, they reached a wide river. "We can't cross," said Hansel. "I don't see any plank or any bridge." "And there's no boat around either, but a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she'll help us cross." Little duck, Hansel and Gretel are out of luck. Of planks and bridges there's a lack. Carry us on your snow-white back." And the duck did come over. Hansel took a seat on it and asked his little sister to join him. "No," Gretel replied. "It would be too heavy for the little duck. We must take us across one at a time." The kindly creature did so, and when they were safely across and had walked a little farther, the forest became more and more familiar to them, and they finally caught sight of their father's house off in the distance. Then they started to run. They burst through the door and hugged their father. The man hadn't been happy since abandoning his children in the forest, and his wife had died. Gretel shook out her little apron so that the pearls and jewels bounced around in the room, and Hansel tossed handful after another out of his pocket as well. Then all their worries were over, and they lived happily ever after. The end.